She called me every night at exactly 2:17. Her voice trembled with fear. He's standing at the window. But when I arrived at her house, he was gone. As was she. I've been a private detective in Chicago for 15 years now. The city's late-night shadows have a way of hiding secrets that most people never glimpse. My office sits above a 24-hour diner on Wacker Drive, where the smell of coffee and grease becomes a strange comfort during those long nights waiting for the phone to ring. When that phone does ring after midnight, it's usually about one of two things: divorce cases or cheating spouses. I've built a reputation for discretion and thoroughness, which means I get plenty of both. But the Hoffman case was different from the beginning. 2 weeks ago, my phone rang at precisely 2:17 a.m. The sound yanked me from a dreamless sleep, my hand fumbling across the nightstand before finding the receiver. "Detective Connor," I answered, my voice still rough with sleep. "Detective Connor?" The woman's voice on the other end was barely above a whisper, cracking with tension. "My name is Emily Hoffman. I'm scared. Someone is standing outside my window." I sat up, instantly alert. "Have you called the police, Miss Hoffman?" "Yes, twice this week." Her breath caught. "They came, looked around, found nothing. Said it was probably just shadows from the trees. But he's there, every night. Standing perfectly still. Watching me." There was something in her voice that unsettled me. Not just fear, something deeper. A kind of certainty that sent a chill across my skin. "What's your address?" I asked, already reaching for my notepad. She lived in Lake Forest, an affluent suburb north of the city. Old money, manicured lawns, and the kind of security that makes residents feel untouchable. Not the usual setting for stalker cases. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told her. "Keep your doors locked, stay away from the windows, and keep your phone close." "Please hurry," she whispered. "He never stays past 3. I threw on clothes, holstered my Glock under my jacket, and was in my car within 5 minutes. The streets were empty at that hour, allowing me to make good time despite the distance. The radio played softly, some late-night jazz program that normally would have settled my nerves. Not tonight. I reached Lake Forest just before 3 a.m. Emily Hoffman's house was exactly what I expected, a 2-story Tudor revival set back from the road, surrounded by mature oak trees that threw complex shadows across the perfectly maintained lawn. The kind of place featured in real estate magazines. The security gate was open when I arrived, not a good sign. I parked my car in the circular driveway and approached cautiously, scanning the perimeter. No obvious movement. No figure by any window that I could see. Just the soft glow of lights from inside and the gentle rustling of leaves in the autumn breeze. I knocked on the front door, and it opened almost immediately. Emily Hoffman stood before me, a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and honey blonde hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She wore an oversized sweater and leggings, her feet bare against the hardwood floor. Her hands clutched a mug of something that smelled like chamomile tea, but they trembled so badly that the liquid threatened to spill over the rim. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I know how this must sound." The interior of the house matched its exterior in elegance, tasteful art on the walls, antique furniture that looked both valuable and unused. Everything was in perfect order, except for the woman standing before me. "He's gone now," she continued, leading me into a spacious living room. "He always disappears right before anyone else arrives." "Tell me exactly what you saw, Ms. Hoffman," I said, taking out my notebook. She sank into a plush armchair, her eyes fixed on the large bay window that overlooked the front lawn. "The same as always. Tall figure. Dark coat. Standing perfectly still beneath the oak tree, looking up at my bedroom window." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "His face, it's never clear. Like it's smudged somehow." I made notes, keeping my expression neutral. And you've never recognized this person? No former relationships gone sour, no work conflicts, nobody who might have a reason to intimidate you? Emily shook her head, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I've gone over it 100 times in my mind. I've lived here for 3 years. I work remotely as a software engineer. I barely even date. She paused, her eyes darting to the window again. The only significant relationship I've had recently ended 6 months ago. Amicable split. He moved to Seattle. Mind if I look around outside? I asked. She nodded, wrapping her sweater tighter around herself. Please do. The night air was crisp, carrying the first hints of winter. I circled the house methodically, checking the ground beneath each window for footprints or disturbances in the soil. Nothing. The grass was unmarked, the flower beds undisturbed. I examined the spot under the oak tree where Emily claimed to have seen the figure. The ground was covered with fallen leaves, but none appeared compressed by footsteps. No security cameras mounted on the house, I noted. A strange oversight for such a valuable property. When I returned inside, Emily was in the kitchen, her hands still shaking as she poured coffee into 2 mugs. Find anything? She asked, not turning around. Nothing obvious, I replied, accepting the coffee she offered. No footprints, no disturbed ground. You mentioned you don't have security cameras. The neighborhood association has cameras at all entrances, she explained. But individual homes aren't permitted to have visible security equipment. Aesthetic concerns. She rolled her eyes. I've been meaning to install something discreet, but... She trailed off. But you never thought you'd need it, I finished for her. She nodded, staring into her coffee. I always felt safe here. Until 2 weeks ago. What happened 2 weeks ago? Emily's expression changed, a flicker of something, recognition, crossing her face before disappearing. Nothing specific. It just started. She took a sip of coffee. The first night, I woke up suddenly. Felt like someone was watching me. I went to the window and saw him. Standing perfectly still. When I blinked, he was gone. I studied her as she spoke. She was clearly terrified, but there was something else, a hesitation, as if she wasn't telling me everything. Ms. Hoffman, I said gently, I can't help you if you're withholding information. She looked up sharply. I'm not. There's something else. Something you're not telling me. Emily set her coffee down, her hands finally steady. 2 weeks ago, I found an old photograph in the attic. Previous owners must have left it. A family portrait from what looked like the 1970s. Standing behind them was someone. Tall, wearing a dark coat. Their face was blurred, like they moved just as the photo was taken. She swallowed. The night after I found that photo, I saw him outside for the first time. Now we were getting somewhere. Do you still have this photograph? I put it back where I found it. It felt wrong to keep it. She wrapped her arms around herself. I know how it sounds. That's why I didn't mention it to the police. They already looked at me like I was hysterical. I'd like to see it, I said. Emily hesitated, then nodded. It's late. Would you mind coming back tomorrow? I took a sleeping pill before you arrived. It's starting to hit me. I left her my card with my personal cell number written on the back. Call me anytime. I mean that. I don't care what hour. She walked me to the door, suddenly looking very small in the grand entrance hall of her home. Thank you for believing me, Detective Connor. I never said I did, I replied honestly. But I'm taking you seriously. There's a difference. I was halfway to my car when she called after me. Detective? What if he's not really there? What if I'm just seeing things? I turned back. Then we figure that out too. Either way, you'll get answers. As I drove back to the city, the jazz station had switched to classical music, something melancholy with too many minor chords. I switched it off, preferring the silence. Something about Emily Hoffman's story nagged at me. Not just the obvious inconsistencies, but something deeper. A pattern I couldn't quite piece together yet. I didn't have to wait long for the next development. At exactly 2:17 a.m. the following night, my phone rang again. Emily's voice came through, higher-pitched with panic. "He's back. Standing in the same spot. Please hurry." I made it to Lake Forest in 25 minutes this time, pushing my aging Crown Victoria harder than was wise. But when I pulled into the driveway, there was no one visible beneath the oak tree. No figure in a dark coat. No watcher of any kind. Emily met me at the door in her nightgown and robe, hair disheveled as if she'd been tossing and turning before the call. "He was there," she insisted before I could ask. "He disappeared the moment your headlights turned into the driveway." I didn't argue, just nodded. "Show me the photograph." She led me upstairs, through a hallway lined with generic landscape paintings, to a small door that opened onto a narrow staircase. The attic was finished but clearly unused, empty except for a few sealed boxes labeled with dates and contents in neat handwriting. "It was in that trunk," Emily said, pointing to an antique steamer trunk pushed against the far wall. I knelt beside the trunk and lifted the heavy lid. The musty smell of old paper and forgotten memories wafted up. Inside were stacks of documents, property deeds, old bank statements, and faded photographs, all neatly organized with archival tissue paper between them. "I was looking for information about the house's history," Emily explained, standing a few feet back, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I never imagined I'd find that." I carefully sorted through the contents, my gloved hands gently moving aside brittle papers. Near the bottom of the stack, I found it, a Polaroid photograph from what looked to be the mid-1970s. A family of four stood on the front lawn of this very house, smiling stiffly at the camera. Mother, father, two children around 10 years old. And behind them, partially obscured by the oak tree, was a figure. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. The figure was tall, wearing what appeared to be a dark overcoat despite the clearly summer setting of the photograph. And just as Emily had described, the face was wrong. Not blurred exactly, but distorted, as if the features had been smudged by a careless thumb while the ink was still wet. "The Dorseys," Emily said, reading from the back of the photograph. "August 1976. I slipped the photograph into an evidence bag. Mind if I borrow this? I'd like to have it analyzed." She looked relieved. "Please. I don't want it in the house." Back downstairs, Emily seemed calmer, as if sharing the photograph had lifted a weight. She made tea this time, and we sat at her kitchen island. "What do you know about the previous owners?" I asked. "Not much. I bought the house from an elderly couple who were moving to Florida. They'd only owned it for 5 years. Before that." She frowned. "I'm not sure. The real estate agent mentioned something about the house having a bit of history, but I assumed she meant it was architecturally significant." "The Dorseys," I mused. "The name doesn't ring any bells, but I can look into it." Emily's hands tightened around her mug. "Do you think, is it possible this is some kind of elaborate prank? Maybe neighborhood kids who found old photos and are trying to scare the woman who lives alone?" It was a rational explanation, one I'd considered myself. But something about the photograph disturbed me on a level I couldn't quite articulate. "It's possible," I acknowledged. "But let's explore all angles. Tomorrow I'll check county records, see what I can find about the house and the Dorseys. In the meantime..." I hesitated, then decided to trust my instincts. "Would you be comfortable if I stayed here tonight? I could sleep on the couch, keep watch." Relief flooded her face. Would you? I haven't had a full night's sleep in 2 weeks. I made a few calls, one to an old buddy at Chicago PD to run a preliminary background check on Emily Hoffman, standard procedure, nothing personal, and another to my answering service to let them know I'd be unreachable until morning. Emily provided blankets and a pillow for the sofa, then retreated upstairs. I heard her bedroom door close, followed by the distinct sounds of a lock being turned and a chair being wedged beneath the doorknob. Smart woman. I settled into position on the sofa with a clear view of both the front door and the bay window. My Glock rested on the coffee table within easy reach. The house creaked and settled around me, each sound amplified in the midnight quiet. At 1:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from my police contact. Emily Hoffman, 34. Software engineer for Meridian Health Systems. Clean record. One restraining order filed against her 3 years ago by former employer. Claim, harassment after termination. Order expired, never renewed. Interesting note, maiden name Dorsey. Any connection? I stared at the text for a long moment. Emily Dorsey Hoffman. She had the same last name as the family in the photograph, yet claimed to have no knowledge of them. Why lie about something so easily discovered? I was pondering this new information when I heard it, a soft tapping sound from the direction of the bay window. 3 distinct taps, like fingernails against glass. I rose silently, Glock in hand, and moved toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but a gap at the edge provided a narrow view of the front lawn. The oak tree stood sentinel in the moonlight, its branches casting intricate shadows across the grass. And beneath it stood a figure. Tall. Dark coat. Motionless. My heart rate accelerated, but my hand remained steady. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure was positioned just where the shadows were deepest. I couldn't see a face, just the impression of height and stillness. As I watched, the figure raised one arm, slowly pointing toward the second floor, toward Emily's bedroom. I moved quickly to the front door, disengaging the locks as quietly as possible. In the 15 seconds it took me to step outside, the figure had vanished. No movement in the bushes, no car starting in the distance. Just the empty lawn and the gentle rustle of oak leaves. I circled the property, gun drawn, finding nothing. When I returned inside, locking the door behind me, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The chair I'd been sitting in had been moved. Just slightly, an inch or two to the left, but I was certain of it. Someone had been in the house while I was outside. I took the stairs 2 at a time, calling Emily's name. No response. Her bedroom door was still locked from the inside. I pounded on it, identified myself, warned her I was coming in, then broke through with a well-placed kick. The room was empty. The bed was made, looking untouched. The window was closed and locked. On the nightstand, Emily's phone lay charging, its screen dark. Next to it was a leather-bound journal, open to the most recent entry. I picked up the journal, my police training warring with ethics. In a missing person situation, I reasoned, normal privacy boundaries had to be secondary. The handwriting was neat but hurried, the pen having pressed deeply into the paper. Today he knocked for the first time. 1 2 3. He's never done that before. I'm afraid he knows I can see him now. Detective Connor is downstairs, but I don't think that will stop what's coming. If you're reading this, I'm sorry for not telling you everything. The trunk in the attic, false bottom. Look beneath. The entry ended abruptly, the pen having skidded across the page as if yanked from her hand. I searched the room methodically, finding nothing out of place except for a single long scratch on the inside of the window frame, as if someone had clawed at it from inside the room. Returning to the attic, I examined the steamer trunk more carefully. The false bottom was cleverly disguised, but once I knew to look for it, I found the release mechanism easily enough, a small notch in the corner that, when pressed, allowed the bottom panel to be lifted. The hidden compartment contained a manila folder filled with newspaper clippings, all from 1976. The headlines told a grim story: Dorsey family disappearance baffles police. No leads in missing family case. Dorsey children still missing, parents' bodies found. According to the articles, James and Margaret Dorsey and their twin children, Emily and Ethan, had vanished without a trace in August 1976. 3 weeks later, the parents' bodies were discovered in a wooded area 20 miles away, apparent victims of a murder-suicide. The father had shot his wife, then himself. The 10-year-old twins were never found. My mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. Emily Hoffman was 34 now, which meant she would have been born around 1990, too young to be the Emily Dorsey from 1976. A relative, perhaps? Niece or cousin who shared the name? The last item in the folder was a handwritten letter, dated 1 week before the Dorsey family disappeared. It was from Margaret Dorsey to her sister. The figure John saw by the oak tree has returned, night after night. He stands motionless, watching our bedroom window. John is convinced it's Wallace Mills from next door, trying to frighten us into selling the house, but I'm not so sure. There's something wrong with the way he looks, like his features aren't quite solid. The children haven't seen him, thank God. John installed new locks today. If this continues, we're taking the children to your place next weekend. They never made it to that weekend. I carefully refold the letter, my hands not as steady as I would have liked. The timeline made no sense. If Emily Hoffman was born in 1990, how could she have known about the figure that haunted the Dorseys in 1976? Why claim the name Dorsey as her maiden name? And most importantly, where was she now? I returned downstairs, the folder tucked securely under my arm. The house felt different somehow, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. I checked my watch, 3:10 a.m. My phone rang, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet house. The caller ID displayed Emily's name. Emily. Where are you? Are you safe? The connection was poor, her voice distant and breaking up. He's here, with me now. Don't trust what you see. Emily, tell me where you are. I can help you. The basement, always been, the basement. The line went dead. I hadn't seen a basement door during my search of the house. Moving quickly through the kitchen, I checked for doors that might lead below. Nothing. In the hallway, behind the stairs, I found it, a narrow door painted the same color as the wall, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. It opened to reveal a steep staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and damp, carrying a musty scent of earth and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. I took out my flashlight and started down, my gun ready. The wooden steps creaked beneath my weight, each sound seeming to echo in the confined space. The basement was larger than I expected, stretching beneath the entire footprint of the house. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing exposed stone foundation walls and a dirt floor in some areas, concrete in others. Old furniture draped in sheets created strange, hulking shapes in the shadows. Emily. I called, moving deeper into the space. It's Detective Connor. I'm here to help. No response except the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Near the center of the room stood an old metal support column. As my light swept past it, I caught a glimpse of something, a flash of pale color against the dark metal. Moving closer, I saw it was a hand, bound to the column with duct tape. I rushed forward, my heart pounding. Emily sat slumped against the column, her hands secured behind her around the metal post. Her head hung forward, hair obscuring her face. Emily, I said, kneeling beside her. I'm going to get you out of here. When she raised her head, I nearly fell backward in shock. Her face was wrong. Distorted in the same way as the figure in the photograph. Features blurred and smudged, as if someone had taken an eraser to them. Only her eyes remained distinct, wide and filled with terror. She tried to speak, but her voice emerged garbled, like audio played at the wrong speed. The only words I could distinguish were "not real" and "run." Before I could process what I was seeing, my phone rang again. Emily's number. But Emily was right in front of me, bound to the column, her face distorted beyond recognition. I answered the call, unable to look away from the figure before me. "Detective Connor." Emily's voice came through clearly. "Where are you?" "I just got home and saw the front door open." "What?" I managed, my brain struggling to reconcile what I was hearing with what I was seeing. "Emily, I'm in the basement. You called me, said you were here." "What basement?" "This house doesn't have a basement, detective." The figure before me began to change, its form stretching and distorting, the blurred face resolving into a familiar shape, my own face, looking back at me with an expression of pure malice. I scrambled backward, nearly dropping my phone. "Emily, listen to me. Get out of the house. Now. Call the police and wait for them outside." "But. Now, Emily." I ended the call and turned to run, but the stairs I had descended were gone. In their place was a solid stone wall, with no indication that a doorway had ever existed. The figure that wore my face smiled, its features rippling like a reflection in disturbed water. "She'll never leave," it said, its voice a distorted version of my own. "None of them do." I raised my gun, though some part of me knew it would be useless. "What are you?" But the figure was already changing again, stretching and shrinking until it resembled the tall man in the dark coat from the photograph. Its face remained smudged and indistinct, but I could feel its eyes on me. "Time to join the others, detective," it said, stepping toward me. My phone rang one final time, "Emily again." I answered, desperate for any connection to the world outside this impossible basement. "Connor. The police are here. Where are you?" I tried to answer, but my voice wouldn't work. The tall figure reached for me, its hand passing through my chest like cold mist. The last thing I remember is the phone falling from my grasp, Emily's voice growing distant as darkness closed in. I woke up in my car, parked outside my apartment building in Chicago. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Emily Hoffman. The events of the night felt like a dream, vivid but impossible. Had I hallucinated everything after arriving at Emily's house? A stress-induced breakdown after too many late nights and too much coffee? I drove back to Lake Forest, needing to check on Emily and make sense of what had happened. The house looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less imposing. The "for sale" sign on the front lawn was weathered, suggesting it had been there for some time. A real estate agent was unlocking the front door as I pulled up. She smiled professionally as I approached. "Here for the open house?" "You're early, but I don't mind. Always happy to have serious buyers." "I'm looking for Emily Hoffman," I said. "The owner." The agent's smile faltered. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. This property has been vacant for nearly 2 years. The previous owners were the Prestons, elderly couple who moved to Florida. But I was here last night," I insisted. "With Emily Hoffman. She called me because someone was stalking her." The agent took a step back, her hand moving to her phone. "Sir, I assure you, no one named Emily Hoffman has lived here. The house has been empty since the Prestons left. Perhaps you have the wrong address." But I knew I didn't. This was the right house. The same oak tree stood in the front yard, its branches casting familiar patterns across the lawn. As the agent made a discreet call, probably to the police, I noticed something tucked into my jacket pocket. The Polaroid photograph of the Dorsey family. Only now, there were 5 figures in the picture instead of 4. The parents, the 2 children, the tall blurred figure behind them, and me, standing to the side, my face gradually losing definition around the edges.